Hello and welcome to another TLDR EU video. After being cooped up for weeks and months on end, many of us are desperate to spread our wings and see a little more than just the road to the supermarket. So with summer around the corner, many of you may be wondering if holidaying abroad in Europe is going to be a thing come August, and just how complicated the process will be. So in this video, we'll try and answer that, outlining the approach that many EU countries are taking, as well as Europe's strategy for vaccine passports. If you can't get away this summer but want a tiny version of that, literally, then check out our Countries with Shoes pin badges. We've got one for every EU country, as well as a bunch of others, so brighten up your day a little, show some loyalty to your favourite countries, and support the channel by checking out the designs in our merch store. It's linked down below. A lot of Europe is quite dependent on tourism. Member states, especially southern ones such as Greece, Portugal and Spain, have been itching to welcome back tourists. And so, at the beginning of May, the European Commission formally proposed relaxing the restrictions on non-essential travel that had been in place. As things stood, travellers from outside the European Union were barred from entering unless they fulfilled a number of criteria, not least that the purpose of the trip was essential. The Commission proposed relaxing that barrier to allow the entry to the EU for non-essential reasons, for all persons coming from countries with good epidemiological situations, as well as all people who have received the last recommended dose of an EU-authorised vaccine. Although they did also recommend maintaining an emergency brake, arguing that if the COVID situation worsens or a particular variant of concern begins to threaten Europe, a member state would be allowed to urgently and temporarily suspend all inbound travel from non-EU citizens. So let's take a quick whistle-stop tour of some of Europe's major tourist destinations to see whether summer is back or not. Let's start with France. According to France 24, before the pandemic, France was the most visited country in the world, but restrictions remain tough. All travellers older than 11 from fellow European countries must have a negative pre-departure PCR test performed within 72 hours before arriving. Due to the spread of the Indian variant, formerly B.1.617.2, those from the likes of Australia, Israel and the UK must also have a negative pre-departure PCR test and must also quarantine for 7 days after arrival. The picture in Spain is almost identical. All travellers over 6 from high-risk areas must present a negative pre-departure test 72 hours prior to arrival, although those from Australia, Israel and the UK, among others, are exempt. For Portugal, all travellers older than 2 must again present negative pre-departure PCR tests, although those arriving from high-risk countries, calculated as having more than 500 cases per 100,000, must also complete a 14-day isolation period. However, fully vaccinated travellers to the Portuguese island of Madeira have no restrictions on their movement at all. Yet again, it's a similar story in Italy, a negative pre-departure test, but this time done 48 hours beforehand. And from the 16th of May, requirements for quarantine were dropped for all EU, UK and Israeli travellers. So you might be wondering what's happening here. Isn't Europe meant to be unlocking? Well, the key to a true summer of sun is what many have called vaccine passports, or health passports, or digital green certificates. Okay, we haven't come up with a good name for it yet. Countries are desperate to welcome fully vaccinated travellers, but they haven't until recently agreed on the practicalities of doing so. Any vaccine passport system had to be universal, working across the whole Schengen area, and not unduly discriminate between countries and people. On the 20th of May, the European Parliament and Council finally reached an agreement on a Europe-wide vaccine passport, called the EU Digital COVID Certificate. The certificate, which will only roll out from July, will facilitate free, safe movement within the EU and can be obtained through one of 3 routes: a course of vaccination with an EU-approved vaccine, a negative PCR or rapid antigen test, or proof of recovery from a previous infection. The certificate will, like those provided through the NHS app in the UK, be available in a digital or paper-based format. And while the focus will be on travel, it has the potential to be used for national purposes, if it's provided for in national law. In a bid to actually give the certificate some weight, the Commission has stated that member states shall refrain from imposing additional travel restrictions on holders of the certificate, unless they are necessary and proportionate to safeguard public health. The elephant in the room, however, is the fact that the Commission is unable to force countries to adhere to the certificate, because, under the Schengen Border Code, it's the individual member state that ultimately has the final say on border policy, which has led to some countries opening up faster than others to capture pent-up demand. In April, for instance, Malta, or more specifically the Malta Tourism Authority, went as far as paying tourists to visit. With a total budget of some €3.5 million, so-called independent travellers to the Maltese Islands, staying for a minimum of 3 nights in a 3-star hotel or better, would get a cash payment from June. Those staying in a 3-star hotel, for instance, would receive €50 per person per booking. A 4-star one would get you 75, and a 5-star, €100. And with some 3-star hotels available for just €20 a night, in theory a 3-night hotel could cost you just €10 if you go alone, or if you go with a partner, you could be €40 in the black. Following the publication of the UK's Green List, the list of countries where travellers don't have to quarantine upon return, one of the only European destinations included on the list, saw a 600% surge. A spokesman for Thomas Cook the day after the list was announced by the British government stated that yesterday more people bought holidays to Portugal than had bought the whole of the rest of the year, with said holidays being longer and more expensive than usual. Over half of the bookings that day were 5-star hotels. Jet2 saw demand for Faro in the Algarve and the island Madeira climb by some 600% in 24 hours, a figure which, when compared with the previous week, became a 1,300% rise. Demand was so strong that the price of a flight from London to Portugal went from £130 per person to £270 in less than 3 hours. It's ultimately this pent-up demand that more and more countries in Europe and airlines want to capture. In fact, the chief executive of EasyJet, one of Europe's largest low-cost carriers, has on multiple occasions called for policymakers to be pragmatic and open up countries, citing an obligation to customers who want to see their families or travel for business, going on to say that people have been waiting to go on holiday and that it's the number one priority for people coming out of this. But what do you think? Is this summer going to be a summer of normality in Europe? Will you be holidaying abroad? Or is it too early to start thinking about that? As always, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.